I want to talk today about a Marvel Masterpieces 2020 painting of Green Goblin, and I want to talk about reference, which means I need to stop and back up a little bit. When I begin a painting, I always start with a pencil sketch and work around ideas, and then I will start building my reference. In this case, I'm working with model Pat King, who was generous enough to give permission to use the photos in this video. Normally, I'm reluctant to share any reference photos that feature models unless they've given me explicit permission to share it like Pat did here. That gives us an opportunity to talk about the process from an earlier stage than I have in some of these other videos. In addition to shooting pictures of Pat, I also was able to shoot some pictures from up on the observation deck of a pretty tall building in downtown Philadelphia, which was good for getting this kind of overhead scenes that I was going to use for the background of this as well as some other paintings. And I was able to pick through these later on and kind of figure out what worked well for the scenes that I was doing. And in this case, the Green Goblin, the original pencil sketch, was really just focused on the pose and the mood of the figure. It wasn't until I started putting this together in Photoshop that I really kind of filled out the rest of the piece. In an exchange I had with someone recently talking about my reference process, they noted that the sketching phase for me includes this kind of collaging in Photoshop, photo bashing, Frankensteining. I've heard different artists call it different things, but I'm working here with a model and environment, and I believe that the glider reference, I had taken some pictures of airplane wings and I was building that out of pieces of those. The exhaust is from some pictures of fire and explosions that I've taken over the years, fireworks, things like that. It's the smoke from campfire smoke. There's just a ton of things I have in my reference library that I will put together and fuss around with, make the composition in this exploration process. But the figure itself is built out of multiple pictures. And when I sat down to do this video originally, I was thinking I'll just grab one of the photos of Pat and have that kind of off in the side as the painting time-lapse rolls. And I realized, pulling this up again, I haven't looked at this in a few years. I painted this painting about 4 or 5 years ago. Looking at the reference, I realized that it was layered out of, I think, something like 6 or 8 different individual photographs just for that figure. And then on top of that was Photoshop work that I had done to manipulate individual pieces, add costuming details, things like that. It might be a little bit overkill for some people to go into this level of preparation and detail. And that's a question, I think, when it comes to referencing that every artist has to ask themselves is, really, what is it that you need from your reference? And I know some artists who work very minimally when it comes to referencing. They might go as little as just having a mirror handy to take a look at themselves every now and then if they need to check on something, or shooting pictures with the phone is something that a lot of folks do who really don't want to get too deep into referencing, but still want to have some kind of outside source of information to look at. I think that that's really the main thing that you get from reference is we all have a certain library that we access in our own experience and memory. And the more direct observational study you do and the more you practice working from your own library, the better you get at that. On the other hand, there is an infinite amount of information in the outside world. And when we supplement our internal library with information from external reference sources, we can find and use all kinds of additional details that we might not thought of, or that we might not quite understand how to convey. And for me, I really aimed for a high level of realism in these pieces, and working from models and working with photographic reference really helped me to not only achieve those details in the painting, but also figure out how to put all those details together on the front end. I spend a lot of time just working out the composition and putting together and really finding ideas sometimes in the process of putting these things together, and being ready to build off of unexpected coincidences that might happen as I'm putting a piece of background against a figure and trying out different scenarios and seeing what works, or riffing with the model, coming in with a particular idea, but then finding other ideas with the model as we work, and just being open to that. And I also really enjoy photography, which is part of why I think I also get more into the referencing side of this. And that is a thing that has really helped my painting a lot, is to think about the paintings often in photo kind of concepts. So when I'm planning a piece or conceptualizing an idea, one of the things that's very much in my mind is, if this was a real scene and you were able to capture it with a camera, where would that camera be? What kind of lens would you have mounted on your camera? And then figure it out from there. And that helps me really not only design the picture, but it also helps me gather the reference or figure out how to shoot the reference I need. For example, the focal length that you think of, whether you're going to plan a picture that's a wide angle or a telephoto style image, is going to make a difference as to how it feels to the viewer. Wider angle scenes feel more immediate. They feel more kinetic usually, and we feel more like we're in the scene, as opposed to a telephoto scene where it feels more like we're observing from a safe distance. So if you have in your mind a more wide angle scene, it makes sense to shoot that reference with wide angle lenses. And that means you're going to probably be closer to your model. You're going to have more exaggeration in terms of foreshortening and what people think of as lens distortion. It's really just a matter of keeping that consistent throughout the piece. And the same with where your eye line is. If your horizon is high in the environment but low on the figure, it's going to look like a mismatch. So it's really just a question for me of thinking through the placement of everything and how it's all going to fit together. And then choosing a lens and staying consistent with the choice. And you can fudge things a little bit, but it's the same with lighting. You want to have a consistent overall lighting that has an internal logic to the piece. You don't want to have lighting coming from one direction on your figure and coming from another direction on the background, unless there's some reason in the context of the story that might make sense. Like, for example, if somebody is in an interior scene and there's a light source out of frame on the left, but there's another light source out of frame in the background, and it just kind of makes sense because we're used to seeing that in real life. You have to think about how it's all going to fit together. And for me, thinking about if it actually was really happening in front of me, what's my lens choice? Where do I put my camera? That really helps me to kind of put all of that together. And then the final question of what do you need from your reference? What is essentially the overall effect that you want to get? For me, that is really coming down to helping me see the final piece as I'm developing the idea. I've talked in some other videos that recently I've been exploring not doing this to work with much less of a safety net. But generally speaking, I really like to figure things out before I commit to paint. And this gives me an opportunity to try different ideas and play around with things and see what works and see what feels exciting. And maybe I spend a lot of time not actually painting, but just pushing things back and forth in the reference compilation. But I think for me, it's all worth it in the end. And it also really helps me to have this very precise visual of what my target is, what it is that I'm working towards. And lately, I'm building a lot of my reference with 3D. I'm working a little bit less with my photo library and with models than I used to, and working more with 3D and the advantages that that brings of really being able to go back and manipulate in fine detail some of the things with lighting and pose and that sort of thing. But the general idea is the same. And when it all comes together in this reference compilation, I can print that out actual size to the painting I'm going to do and have it next to my easel. And then as I work, I have all that information to pull from. I've done all this advanced prep and thought into what the composition is going to be, how everything's going to fit together. I can try to foresee and avoid tangents and value issues and all the other kinds of things that otherwise might come up halfway through a painting and make you realize that you need to back up and redo something. I like to try to get that stuff out of the way right at the beginning. So that's just some brief thoughts that I have on the whole concept of referencing and how I incorporate it into my work. I think there's no real wrong way to do it. I think the biggest problem that I see with a lot of people is aversion to using reference at all, feeling some sort of guilt or concern or imposter syndrome about not being able to just do everything out of your head. I feel like if I can do it better with the extra information that I get from reference, I want to do it better. I want to do the best picture that I can do. And this is the method that I enjoy and that works for me.